Hi everyone, it's Tara. Welcome back to my channel. I'm going to play another room in the Attacking and Defending AWS Learning Path for TryHackMe. The room I'm going to play in this video walkthrough is the Quest for Least Privilege, which is part of the IAM module in this AWS Learning Path. And in the Quest for Least Privilege room, we are going to learn how to scope an IAM policy down to only the necessary actions. And I got my little cloud, I don't know if you can see it, my little cloud themed beverage, nice clouds on the can, and I'm ready to go. So let's see what this room is all about. All right, so the first task in this room is an introduction task. One of the most common tasks for anyone working in AWS IAM is to scope IAM policies to include only the necessary privileges required to complete a task. And that's what least privilege means. This is commonly referred to as following the principle of least privilege. In this room, we will take a broadly scoped rule and whittle down access to allow the policy to do three things: audit all EC2 settings, launch machines in the Singapore region, and access a specific corporate S3 bucket. Okay. We'll start with the default administrator access policies. And remember, this is like the God mode policy in AWS, where with the administrator access managed policy, you have permission for every action on every resource in the account. And looks like we have a question already. If you are denied access while you have this policy, what type of policy is blocking you? We learned about this in a different room, but if you have this administrator access policy, you have permission to do everything. And the only reason you might be getting an access denied error trying to do an action in AWS would be because your account is part of an AWS organization that has a service control policy applied. And so the answer is service control policy. That would be kind of the only trump card over this administrator access policy. So let's see if I spelled that right. And if I got that right, let's see, submit. All right, awesome. So that is task one. Task two is going to be our accessing the environment task. So we're used to this at this point. And if you want to see how I suppose you could say set up, or like how I walk through this accessing the environment instructions in detail, head over to my walkthrough of the introduction to IAM room in this same playlist, this same learning path. And in the introduction to IAM room walkthrough, I went through all of this, but it's the same every time. So we don't need to redo it in each video. So I'm just going to hit completed. And then we're going to move on to task three. So remember, we had three things that this policy actually needs to allow for the entity that it's attached to. So the three things that this policy needs to give permission for is auditing all EC2 settings, launching machines in the Singapore region, and accessing a specific corporate S3 bucket. And first, we have limiting by service as task three. Then we're going to limit by read versus modify. So I bet that's going to be like where the auditing action comes into play, and then enumerating specific resources. Anyway, just wanted to align. We're kind of like breaking down one by one those three permissions. And then each task is going to incrementally get us to the full policy. All right. So task three is limiting by service. And the requirement is only to allow access to EC2 and S3. To do that, we need to restrict the actions by service. And this is an example of how we could create a policy that only allows actions in EC2 and S3, although I think they've obfuscated S3 here, maybe. So anyway, that would look like this. However, we probably want to break this out to support two different resources. So we'll do that now. What action is needed in place of XXS? So I think that is supposed to say S3 because that's the two services we want to allow access to. So let's see if I got that right. Whoop, whoop. Okay. So that's S3 for task three. Task four, now we need to limit by read versus modify. So let's see. It threw me off that the sentence started with however. However, we probably want to break this out to support two different resources. So we'll do that now. Okay, so we broke it out by service, like we had mentioned at the end of task three. So now we've got one statement for the EC2 service and one statement for the S3 service. Now we want to make this a read only audit role. We need to limit the policy to only list, describe, and get actions that are read type actions, they wouldn't allow you to modify or delete anything. They would just allow you to look at it. All right, let's see what we got here. We need to limit the policy to only list, describe, and get actions. And it looks like we're going to use wildcards to do that, which makes sense. Now we have EC2, we need to figure out what this is. EC2 get actions all allowed, S3 get actions all allowed, and S3 XXX actions all allowed. So I'm actually going to do the S3 one first because this is the one I kind of like know by heart. So I think in place of S3, we want S3 get and then S3 list is the other read type action in S3. So let's try this. And let's see, I think we just want list. Oh, I guess the little asterisks here kind of give this away too, but this is what I thought. So let's do list and then what is the redacted EC2 action required in place of YYY? So remember, there are three like read action types. Kind of goes back to the two pizza teams and the API actions are not consistent across all services. So the read type actions are list, describe, and get. And I'm pretty sure the EC2, the what it's EC2 describe and EC2 get. So I'm going to try describe here, and the answer format suggests that I'm right. Oh, if I spell describe correctly. So we got EC2 describe. Okay, so that was correct. So this policy for EC2, we're going to allow all describe and all get actions. And for S3, we're going to allow all S3 get actions and all S3 list actions. And right now, we have not scoped down the resources yet. So this policy would allow the principal to describe and get all resources in EC2 and then get and list all resources in S3. The next thing we are going to do is scope this down to only the specific resources. And that's why task 5 is called enumerating specific resources. Finally, we will limit this policy to a subset of resources using wildcards and prefixes. We will start with a new statement to allow all actions on instances in Singapore, in the Singapore region. We also need to add two resources to the S3 statement. The first statement refers to all the objects in the bucket, and the second to the bucket itself. Okay, so here are our statement rules in the policy. So we're allowing describe and get for all EC2 resources. And then looks like we're going to add this rule that is going to allow every EC2 action. And I think, judging by statement ID, this is where we're going to implement the logic to allow all EC2 actions in Singapore. And then here's for S3, where we are going to scope down to the specific S3 bucket. Okay, so there are two resources needed for the S3 statement. Oh, I thought this was going to be building up the question. Sorry for my tone. All right, and then there are two resources needed for the S3 statement. We've seen this before in the learning path as well, but when you're giving permission for the S3 bucket, just the S3 ARN gives permission for the bucket itself. So that would be something like listing the bucket attributes about that bucket. But if you want to give permission to list and get the objects in the bucket, then you need to give the bucket ARN slash wildcard. So that would be access to all the objects in the bucket. So that's really important. Remember, you need both of those to give full read access to a bucket. And then here's the question. What is the element needed in place of XXX to represent the AWS region Singapore? So we need to add the region here to make this rule complete to allow the actions only in Singapore. And remember, ARNs have a predictable format, right? So that's what we're using here. So this is ARN and then AWS and then the EC2 service. And then when we put the region here, this wildcard after region is going to allow any action in EC2 in that region. So when action is requested, the IAM policy evaluation is going to match the resource impacted to this resource rule in the policy. And then these two wildcards are going to ensure that this policy matches the EC2 instances in the region we put here. Anyway, long winded, but what we need to do is figure out the region code for the Singapore region. So let's see if we can just Google that. I'm sure we can. So let's do AWS Singapore region. And let's see if AP, let's even not even open the page. Let's see if AP Southeast 1 is correct. AP Southeast 1. Let's see if that's Singapore. And whoop, whoop. That was the correct answer. So this is a very short and sweet room, but I like it and I like the message. Hopefully it gets the point across. That was the quest for least privilege, and I guess we successfully fulfilled it. But if you work with IAM a lot day to day in AWS, and if you work with AWS, you probably work with IAM a lot. You will find yourself doing this all the time, really trying to understand IAM logic. How do I scope down to the least privilege that is needed for the IAM policy I'm configuring? I do this all the time, and you can easily make mistakes when you do it, and mistakes can be pretty serious. So, this is a good room to get that point across, like start practicing thinking about how can I implement logic that gives the very least permission needed while still allowing the IAM principle to get the job done. All right, I like that room. Thank you very much for watching. Let me know if you have any questions or feedback. And I'm probably just going to plow through ahead to the next room, which is going to be STS credentials. So maybe I will see you in the next video walkthrough.